The gentle sound of rain tapping against the windows of San Francisco harmonized with the rhythm of Linda Wilson's fingers on the keyboard. As the art director for the advertising agency, Creative Impulse, she was putting the finishing touches on a proposal for their next campaign. The view of the city through the large glass windows was shrouded in fog, with evening light filtering between the buildings. "Linda, excellent work." Janet, the president, approached her desk. "I'm confident the client will love this campaign proposal. Your visual sense is truly unmatched." Linda smiled and turned in her chair. "Thank you, Janet. It's the entire team's effort." Modest as always, Janet shrugged. "But we all know how vital you are to this project. Oh, by the way, it's already 6 o'clock. Head home early today." Linda looked at her watch in surprise. "My goodness, you're right. Caitlin has her cooking class today." She hurriedly stuffed papers into her bag and grabbed her coat. As she left the office, she waved to her colleagues. "See you tomorrow." Settling into her car, Linda took a deep breath. She always struggled to balance work and home life. 15 years in the advertising industry had brought her reputation and respect, but it came with many sacrifices. Lately, she'd been feeling guilty about having less time to spend with her 15-year-old daughter, Caitlin. When she arrived home, Linda noticed an unfamiliar car parked in the garage. Opening the door, she heard lively voices and laughter coming from the kitchen. "Mom, you're back." Caitlin came bounding into the hallway, wiping her flour-whitened hands. Caitlin had grown taller and now reached her mother's shoulders, with long brown hair and green eyes inherited from her father. "I'm sorry I'm a little late," Linda apologized, hugging her daughter. "Oh, is someone here?" "Dad came home early. And Jessica's mom is helping us prepare dinner." Linda entered the kitchen to see her husband Brian standing there with a smile. He was wearing a dark blue suit and hadn't yet loosened his tie. Next to him stood Sarah, the mother of Caitlin's best friend Jessica. "Hello, sweetheart." Brian moved away from the counter to greet his wife. "I was able to come home early today. And Sarah happened to stop by and is helping with dinner preparations." "Hello, Linda," Sarah smiled. "The children wanted to learn to cook, so I was teaching them a little. I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, thank you," Linda said. "You're a big help, especially since I was late." Linda took off her coat, washed her hands, and joined the group. The warm atmosphere of family and friends gathered together soothed the day's fatigue. Brian was busy with his days as an investment advisor but tried to value family time. At least, that's how it appeared on the surface. After dinner, when Sarah and Jessica had left and Caitlin had gone upstairs to do her homework, Linda and Brian were finally alone. "Are you traveling again this weekend?" Linda asked, tilting her wineglass. Brian sighed. "Yes, a meeting with a client in Chicago. I'll leave Friday morning and plan to be back Sunday night." "You've been traveling a lot lately." "I'm handling several big clients," Brian answered, looking tired. "But things should settle down next month. Then we can go somewhere as a family." Linda smiled, but there was a touch of loneliness in her gaze. Brian's promise that things will settle down soon had become a familiar phrase over the past few months. She placed her hand on her husband's shoulder. "You look tired too. Why don't you get some rest?" Brian took Linda's hand and showed a grateful expression. "You're always so understanding. I'll check some documents and then head up." Later that night, Linda quietly peeked into Caitlin's room. Her daughter was already asleep with an open textbook still on her lap. Linda entered the room silently, put away the book, and kissed her daughter's forehead. "Good night, my treasure," she whispered. Back in the hallway, Linda paused in front of her husband's study. Light leaking through the door crack indicated Brian was still working. Not wanting to disturb him, Linda quietly headed to her own bedroom. Lying in bed, Linda stared at the ceiling. She was becoming aware that beneath her seemingly perfect life, successful career, beautiful home, loving family, some inexplicable anxiety was creeping in. It was like a shadow without a definite form, but with a presence too large to ignore. The next morning, she received a call from Caitlin's teacher, Mr. Green. "Mrs. Wilson, there's something I'd like to discuss. Caitlin seems a bit down lately." Linda frowned. "What do you mean?" "Her grades are still excellent," Mr. Green reassured her. "It's just that she's not participating in class as actively as before, and she's spending more time alone during breaks. I wondered if she might have something troubling her." "I understand. I'll talk to her tonight," Linda promised. At dinner that evening, Linda casually asked Caitlin, "How's school? Anything interesting happen?" Caitlin shrugged. "Not really. Same as usual. Mr. Green called and said he's a bit concerned about you." "Oh, that," Caitlin looked up. "I'm just a little tired from school stuff." "It's nothing." Brian joined the conversation. "Is there some kind of problem?" "No, Dad," Caitlin smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just school stress. I have a big test next week." Linda and Brian exchanged glances but didn't press further. Teenagers need their own space sometimes. Still, the anxiety in Linda's heart grew a little larger. "Linda, I have important news." Janet's voice echoed throughout the conference room. Colleagues around her watched Linda with curious eyes. The Monday morning staff meeting had taken an unexpected turn. The Clarkson Group has finally decided on the contract. And they've named Linda as the lead art director for this project. Amid the applause, Linda couldn't hide her surprise and joy. The Clarkson Group was one of the largest retail chains on the West Coast, and their rebranding campaign was a major talking point in the industry. "Marion will be your partner," Janet continued. "I want you two to do your best work." Marion Chen smiled at her from the adjacent seat. As a copywriter, she had worked with Linda several times before, and her writing talent stood out within the team. "This is wonderful," Marion said to Linda after the meeting. "But it's going to be hard work. We only have 3 weeks until the deadline." Linda took a deep breath. "We'll manage. Let's work hard together." From that day on, Linda's life transformed. She was confined to the office from early morning until late at night, sometimes staying late with Marion. She sent a text message to Caitlin. "I'll be late again tonight. Warm up the dinner in the refrigerator. Love you." Caitlin's reply was brief, "Okay. Good night." A week passed, and Linda realized her family time was diminishing rapidly. Brian was also busy with his own work, and they hardly had time to talk properly. Their conversations were limited to practical matters: who would take Caitlin to school, who would do the shopping. On Thursday night, Linda returned home unusually early. Entering the quiet house, she found that Brian hadn't returned yet. She went upstairs and knocked on Caitlin's door, but there was no answer. Worried, she gently opened the door. Caitlin was curled up asleep on the bed. However, as Linda approached, she noticed the pillow was wet with tears. Linda gently stroked her daughter's hair. When Caitlin opened her eyes, she showed a momentary look of surprise. "Mom, you're home already?" "Yes, I finished a bit early today." Linda sat beside her daughter. "Were you crying?" Caitlin hurriedly wiped her eyes. "No, I was probably just having a bad dream." "Did something happen? Any problems at school?" "Really, it's nothing." Caitlin sat up and forced a smile. "I'm just tired. Final exams are coming up." Linda took her daughter's hand. "If you're worried about something, I'm always here to listen. You know that, right?" Caitlin nodded but avoided her mother's eyes. "I know. But I'm really okay. Linda was conflicted inside. It was clear something was wrong with her daughter, but trying to force her to talk might backfire. She lightly kissed Caitlin's cheek. I'll prepare dinner. Want to come down? I'll come after I finish my homework. Linda reluctantly left the room. As she descended the stairs, she heard her phone ring. It was Marion. Linda, I'm sorry, but the client has suddenly requested design changes by tomorrow morning. We need to review it again tonight. Linda sighed. All right. I'll be back at the office in an hour. After hanging up, she held her head at the kitchen counter. Once this job was finished, she would have to seriously reclaim time with her family. But for now, she had to focus on making the project successful. As Linda took some ingredients out of the refrigerator, the front door opened. Brian entered the house, looking tired. Hey, it's unusual to see you at home, he said, loosening his tie. Sarcasm. Linda couldn't hide a touch of irritation. Brian raised his hands. No, I'm genuinely surprised. We've been like ships passing in the night lately. He entered the kitchen and stood beside Linda. Where's Caitlin? She's doing homework in her room. But something seems off. She was crying. Brian's expression darkened momentarily. Did you say anything to her? No, she said she had a nightmare, but... Linda paused her hands and looked intently at her husband. Do you know something? No, nothing, Brian answered a bit too quickly, taking a beer from the refrigerator. She's a teenage girl. It's normal to have ups and downs. Linda was about to continue the conversation when her phone rang again. It was Marion. I have to go back to the office, Linda said apologetically. There's frozen food in the freezer. Heat it up for you too. Brian nodded silently. Linda grabbed her coat and looked up at the stairs, hesitating whether to call out to Caitlin, but decided to leave without doing so. There was no time. That night, while working late at the office with Marion, Linda thought about her family. Something was changing. Something was breaking. And she might have been missing the signs. As the project deadline approached, Linda's anxiety increased. The pressure of work and the sense of unease at home were squeezing her. Brian had suggested last weekend, let's take a family trip when work settles down, but somehow those words didn't resonate deeply with her. One evening, when Linda returned home late, she found a small note on the living room table. It was in Brian's handwriting. Sudden business trip. Leaving early tomorrow morning. Back Sunday. Linda clutched the note. Another trip. Another reduction in family time. She dragged her tired feet upstairs and peeked into Caitlin's room. Her daughter appeared to be sleeping peacefully. At least for tonight. Entering her own bedroom, Linda threw herself onto the bed. Tomorrow was an important presentation. If all went well, this project would end, and she could finally reclaim time with her family. At least, that's what she believed. Wanted to believe. And so, the visual identity of this campaign fuses tradition with innovation. Linda continued her presentation while the executives of the Clarkson Group looked on. Marion stood beside her, ready to explain the copy portion. 3 weeks of late nights and effort had been poured into this moment. Linda's smartphone vibrated, but she ignored it. However, it vibrated again seconds later, and then once more. Something was wrong. After a moment's hesitation, she apologetically said, "Excuse me, just a moment." Looking at the screen, she saw 3 missed calls from an unknown number. Almost immediately, a new message arrived. "Mrs. Wilson, this is the front office of Brookside High School. Your daughter suddenly collapsed. Could you come immediately?" The blood drained from Linda's face. Marion noticed her change in expression and approached. "What's wrong?" "Caitlin, seems to have collapsed at school," Linda said with a trembling voice. "I have to go." Marian quickly understood the situation and gripped her shoulder. "Go. I'll take over here." Linda gave her a grateful look and hurriedly gathered her things. Turning to the clients, she explained, "I have a family emergency." Marian will continue the presentation, and left the conference room. She ran to the parking lot and jumped into her car. The 20-minute drive to the school felt like an eternity today. Her mind was filled with fear and worry. She had known Caitlin wasn't feeling well. Why hadn't she taken it more seriously? Why hadn't she noticed earlier? Arriving at Brookside High School, she rushed in through the main entrance. After giving her name at the reception, she was immediately directed to the infirmary. There, she found Caitlin lying on the nurse's bed. Her daughter's face was pale, with dark shadows under her eyes. Linda hurried to her bedside. "Kate, are you all right? What happened?" When Caitlin saw her mother, tears welled in her eyes. "Mom." Just as she was about to say something, Mr. Green appeared at the infirmary door. His expression was grave, as if he had something important to say. "Mrs. Wilson, I need to speak with you." Linda stood up, confused. "Now?" "Yes, it's very important," Mr. Green indicated the hallway. "Please, let's talk in a separate room." Linda hesitantly squeezed Caitlin's hand and said, "I'll be right back." Mr. Green guided Linda to a small conference room next door. A woman who appeared to be the school counselor was already seated. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Helen Dawson, our school counselor." The counselor nodded with a calm expression. "Please have a seat." Linda sat down nervously. "What's happening? Why did Caitlin collapse?" Mr. Green and the counselor exchanged glances. Mr. Green began to speak. "Actually, about the reason your daughter collapsed, your husband." At that moment, a dull pain shot through Linda's head. The instant she heard Brian's name, she was certain something terrible had happened. She instinctively held her head and leaned forward. "Mrs. Wilson," the counselor called out with concern. Linda said in a trembling voice, "Please continue." Mr. Green took a deep breath and continued. "Caitlin came to the infirmary this morning feeling sick during class. There, she confided that Brian had been abusing her for an extended period, and that he was having a relationship with another woman." Linda listened to the teacher's words in a daze. The words echoed in her mind like an echo. Abuse. Another woman. It couldn't be true. It just couldn't. She tried to stand up but her legs trembled, and she sat back down. "Evidence, is there any evidence?" she asked in a shaking voice. The counselor opened a folder and took out several photographs. "Caitlin gave us permission to show you these." Linda received the photos with trembling hands. The first showed bruises on Caitlin's arms and back. They were clearly made by someone's hands. The next photo was even more shocking. It clearly captured Brian embracing an unknown young woman. Caitlin said she found this photo on her father's phone, Mr. Green explained quietly. The shock of it caused her to collapse this morning. As Linda stared at the photos, she felt her world crumbling. Brian's recent behavior, the changes in Caitlin's demeanor, the tension that had been hovering between them, everything now connected with a horrifying meaning. "How long?" Linda asked, her voice emerging from deep in her throat. "How long has the abuse been going on?" "According to Caitlin, for at least a year," the counselor answered. "It began with verbal abuse and apparently became physical a few months ago." "But why didn't anyone notice?" Linda asked, almost talking to herself. "Why didn't I notice?" Victims of abuse, especially children, often try to hide it, the counselor gently explained. Out of shame, fear, or a desire to protect their family. Linda could no longer hold back her tears. She covered her face with her hands and began to sob, her shoulders shaking. Her husband of many years, the man she had trusted, had transformed into a monster before her eyes. And she had failed to notice her precious daughter's suffering. "We can take legal action," Mr. Green said. "We also need to contact Child Protective Services." Linda raised her face. Her expression was beginning to change from sorrow to determination. "First, I need to take my daughter to a safe place." She stood up and picked up the photos. "May I borrow these? I want to make copies." "Of course," Mr. Green said. "However, before you take Caitlin, she needs some time to talk with the counselor." Linda nodded. "I understand. But please don't take too long. I need to get her out of the house immediately." An hour later, Linda and Caitlin were leaving the school. In the car, they maintained silence. Caitlin occasionally cried, and Linda held her daughter's hand tightly with her right hand. When they arrived home, Linda quietly said, "Go to your room and pack only what you need. We're leaving right away." Caitlin silently nodded and went upstairs. Linda entered the bedroom and pulled out a large suitcase. She mechanically packed clothes, valuables, and documents. She needed to seal off her emotions and focus on action now. She looked up at the bedroom wall where photos of her and Brian as a couple were displayed. Brian and her smiling. The family looking happy. It had all been a lie. She took down that photo and threw it in the trash. 20 minutes later, Linda and Caitlin were loading their luggage into the car. Both remained silent. Then, Linda placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "We're never going back to that house. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. But from now on, I absolutely will." Caitlin clung to her mother and cried for a long time. Linda also shed tears as she embraced her daughter. Sadness, anger, and determination swirled within her. "Let's go," she finally said. "We're starting a new life." As the car left the driveway, Linda looked at the house in the rearview mirror. The house that contained everything she had loved, believed in, and dreamed of. Now it was nothing but a symbol of lies and betrayal. "You'll be safe here for the time being." Marian stood in the center of her apartment's living room, smiling at Linda and Caitlin. Her spacious downtown loft had become a temporary sanctuary for the two. A view of the twilight city spread out through the large windows. "Thank you so much," Linda squeezed her friend's arm. "For accepting such a sudden request." "Are you kidding?" Marian said with a serious expression. "You can stay here as long as you need." Caitlin sat on the sofa, hugging her knees. She had barely spoken a word for several hours. Linda sat next to her daughter and put an arm around her shoulders. "Get some rest. There will be various procedures starting tomorrow, but for now, just rest." Caitlin leaned against her mother and nodded slightly. Linda sent Marian a grateful look. Marian quietly retreated to the adjacent room, giving them space. Late that night, after Caitlin had fallen asleep in the guest room, Linda told Marian everything. The violence, the double life, and the truth that had been hidden for years. Marian listened in silence, occasionally squeezing Linda's hand. "Are you going to take legal action?" Marian finally asked. "I have an appointment with a lawyer tomorrow," Linda answered, looking exhausted. "I'll start the divorce and restraining order procedures." The next morning, Linda and Caitlin visited a law firm specializing in women's cases. Lauren Adams, a middle-aged lawyer, greeted them. "First, let's ensure your safety," Lauren said calmly. "We'll apply for a protection order in court today. Then we'll start the divorce proceedings." Linda took a deep breath. "And what about the abuse?" "We need to report it formally to the police," Lauren said quietly. She gently looked at Caitlin. "I know this is difficult, but we need your testimony." Caitlin was trembling but nodded with a determined expression. I'll talk. I don't want to hide anymore. That afternoon, they both gave statements at the local police station. The photos borrowed from Mr. Green were submitted as evidence. Linda blamed herself repeatedly in her mind. Why hadn't she noticed earlier? Why hadn't she been more vigilant? As they left the police station, Linda's smartphone began to ring. Brian's name was displayed on the screen. She ignored the call. But calls kept coming every few minutes. He must have returned home, Linda said as they returned to Marion's apartment. He's noticed we're gone. As expected, text messages soon began to arrive. Where are you? Why aren't you answering the phone? What's going on? Contact me immediately. Are you with Caitlin? Come home right now. The tone of the messages grew increasingly forceful. Linda contacted Lauren and forwarded all the messages. These will serve as evidence of harassment, Lauren said. Don't reply. However, late that night, a more ominous message arrived. Planning to take my family away. I won't let that happen. I'll find out where you are. Linda trembled with fear. Marion immediately contacted the police. The two spent a sleepless night, taking turns keeping watch to protect Caitlin. The next day, a protective order was granted. Linda took Caitlin to a psychotherapist recommended by the school counselor. Caitlin was silent at first, but as the session progressed, she gradually began to open up. When did it start? Linda quietly asked in the car on the way back. Caitlin answered while staring out the window. Last summer, when you were busy with the Chicago project. Linda's chest ached. Around that time, she had barely been home for several weeks due to a major campaign. At first, it was just yelling, Caitlin continued. But then it gradually escalated. Her voice trembled. I found the photo of that woman 3 months ago. When I was borrowing Dad's smartphone, a message came in. Linda pulled the car over to the shoulder and embraced her daughter. It's okay now. I'll never let him hurt you again. A few days later, contact from Brian suddenly stopped. Linda felt uneasy but continued to stay vigilant as advised by Lauren. A week later, Lauren called. The court date has been set. Next Tuesday, she said. Brian has also received a summons to appear. He has hired a lawyer. Linda took a deep breath. What is he saying? As expected, he's denying everything, Lauren responded calmly. But the evidence is sufficient. Don't worry. On Tuesday morning, Linda and Caitlin headed to the courthouse. Entering the lobby, they saw Brian standing on the other side with his lawyer. He seemed like a different person from the husband Linda had known. His face was pale with dark shadows under his eyes. But his eyes held a cold anger. Don't look at him, Lauren gripped Linda's elbow and said. This way. When the hearing began, Brian's lawyer started attacking Caitlin's testimony. Questions continued like, isn't this just a fabrication stemming from teenage rebellion, and weren't you influenced by your mother? However, Caitlin, despite her trembling voice, told everything. The bruised photos, the details of the verbal abuse, and the days of fear. When she finished her testimony, tears were in the eyes of everyone, including the judge. I don't hate my father, Caitlin said at the end. But I don't want to be scared anymore. Despite Brian's lawyer's rebuttals, the judge granted Linda full custody and issued a restraining order against Brian. Furthermore, a criminal investigation by the police would continue. As they left the courthouse, Caitlin hugged Linda. Is it over? Yes, it's mostly over now, Linda said, stroking her daughter's hair. From now on, we'll start a life that's just our own. She looked back and saw Brian's retreating figure descending the courthouse steps. The man she once loved, the man she thought was part of her life. Now a complete stranger. Let's go. Linda put her arm around Caitlin's shoulders. Mom, look at this. Caitlin burst into the apartment's living room, excitedly waving a letter. Bright spring sunlight streamed through the windows, filling the room with warm light. Linda put down her coffee cup and took the letter from her daughter. From the University of California. She carefully opened the envelope and read its contents. Dear Caitlin Wilson, we are pleased to accept your application for admission. Caitlin cheered and threw herself at her mother. I got in. I really got in. Linda hugged her daughter tightly. Of course you did. Your hard work has paid off. A year had passed since the trial. Linda and Caitlin's new life had begun in a small apartment. For the first few months, both were plagued by nightmares, and sometimes memories of fear would return as flashbacks. But through regular therapy and their strong bond, the wounds in their hearts gradually healed. Linda had been promoted at the advertising agency and gained the position of creative director. Thanks to a more flexible working arrangement, she found it easier to balance work and home life. And most importantly, her relationship with Caitlin had grown deeper and stronger than before. What do you want to study in college? Linda asked while preparing a light celebratory lunch in the kitchen. Psychology, I think, Caitlin said thoughtfully. Someday, I want to do work that helps people who've had experiences like mine. Linda felt a warmth in her chest. She felt proud of her daughter's strength and kindness, overcoming past suffering and wanting to use it to help others. You'll make a wonderful counselor. As they were eating, Linda's smartphone alerted her to breaking news. She casually looked at the screen but caught her breath at the headline displayed. Investment advisor Brian Wilson convicted. 12 years in prison for fraud and embezzlement. Caitlin also peered at the screen. Do you want to see? Linda asked her daughter. Caitlin thought for a moment and then shook her head. No. That's in the past now. Linda continued reading the article. It stated that Brian's fraudulent activities had been going on for years, and the woman with whom he had an inappropriate relationship had also been indicted as an accomplice. His perfect career and family life had all been plastered with lies. How do you feel? Caitlin quietly asked. Linda thought deeply. Anger, sadness, and strangely, a sense of liberation. It's really over, she finally said. A few weeks later, the two stood on Santa Monica Beach. The sunset was painting the sea golden, and waves gently lapped at the shore. This was their small celebratory vacation. To celebrate college admission and the beginning of a new life. I'm glad we came here, Linda said, sitting on the sand. We needed fresh air and new scenery. Yes, Caitlin agreed. The day we left that house, I was really scared. But now I understand. That was the best decision of our lives. No regrets. Linda quietly asked. About leaving everything behind that day. Caitlin took her mother's hand. Not one. We've become a real family. The two watched the sunset in silence. Over the past year, Linda had become involved with a nonprofit organization supporting abuse victims, beginning to help other women by leveraging her own experience. Her life had taken an unexpected direction, but it was more fulfilling than before. What do you think a real family is? Caitlin suddenly asked. Linda looked at her daughter. More important than blood ties is respecting each other, protecting one another. And above all, sharing the truth. We've truly become a family in the real sense now, haven't we? Caitlin smiled. The sound of waves echoed quietly around them, and the first stars began to shine in the sky. The pain of the past would never completely disappear. But it had made them stronger, gentler, and wiser. Linda took a deep breath. She felt true peace. A new path was spreading out before her and her daughter. It might be steep at times, but a path they would walk together. And above all, a path built on truth.